Now, in the book, you stated that as a young child, your verbal language did not develop very quickly. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
My earliest words were I was obsessed with cars and I could name every single car that went past the window. I could name every single one. I'm still quite good, and that was the basis for my conversation. If you were talking to me about cars, I had a somewhat of a wider vocabulary range. If you weren't talking to me about something I wasn't really interested in, I refused to come back on it. I wouldn't have spoken about it, or I would have steered the conversation in such a way that it got back to cars again. Um, I had some sequencing issues with language that I needed to attend speech therapy for until I was around 5 or 6. And then that was things like verbal sequencing, toning, volume, and so on to perfect my eloquent voice as it is now. And I was learning some breathing exercises. I didn't have a stammer as such, but some of the techniques that would be applied to children who would have speech impediments or stammers would have been done with me to increase conversational fluency over time.
Hmm. And you also talked about the fact that you were hyperlexic, that you learned to read at a very, very young age.
Yes, I did. And hyperlexic, and I actually love that word. And believe it or not, I actually assumed in my head that it was the opposite of dyslexic. But I learned suddenly and very recently that it isn't. But I've always loved to read and write. It was my first real form of communication, and my writing style and format has been pretty much 29 years and 9 months in the making. And whenever my teacher would have given the class their reading books for that evening, I always got an extra one or an extra two because I was able to read and comprehend so quickly
Hmm.
that I had such an advanced reading age. And I actually met my first teacher, who is very well detailed in chapter one and is more so coming toward the end of the book as well. That she nearly attempted to give me ridiculous words to try and spell, and I was able to do it. And one example that she gave me was she had asked me to spell the word orchestra, and she was dumbfounded that me as a 5-year-old that I could actually do it. So it was always that talent, and whenever I reflect on my childhood now, I think of that as a little victory, more so than maybe not having as many friends or not being able to communicate or play like other children did. It was just that shift in mindset that I've now had as a grown man.
How did the reading and writing help to develop your communication skills?
Because I would have read aloud what I'd written down. I had like workbooks and pencils, and I would have written down, and I still do read aloud, but I can keep the volume so low that it's barely audible. Like I can't read with my mouth closed. I
You
just
cannot.
can't do it. No, I can't. And whenever I read at home, I do read aloud, and there's times where my if I'm going on a plane journey with someone, whether it's a parent or my girlfriend or a family member or a friend or whatever it may be, sometimes my voice creeps up a little bit. And to the point where I'm like, I return to living with mom and dad, whenever I'm just reading out loud. So that's where that really came from, was that I was able to write words down, I was able to understand them, and then as that developed in my mind, I did speak it aloud.
Okay. And then that reading and writing was really integrated with the development of your verbal language.
Yes, it was. It definitely was. And I sometimes went the other way as well, wherein that I would use words that maybe weren't the correct one for the particular response that I needed to give.
Mhm.
So I would have a lot of times used the wrong words in the wrong places. But I did pick up and keep going forward to get to the just the standard level of language fluency that I have now.
Mhm. One of the things that I find is a very common challenge for parents and for teachers is they seem to have a goal of trying to get that student who's on the autism spectrum to act like and be like everybody else. Do you have a thought or an opinion about that concept?
Yes, I do have an opinion on that concept, and that I don't think that autistic children should be pulled into line with the rest of their classmates. I think that autistic children should have their passions and talents nurtured instead of having their shortcomings, or what the teacher perceives to be their shortcomings, sorry, should I say, highlighted and pretty much broadcast to the rest of their class. I think I do, but I did benefit myself from a lot of classroom assistance right the way through school, from whenever I was 5 right up until I was 16. So I do have experience of it, and I know what it's like to be sort of shepherded in with the rest of the class.
Mhm.
Now, I did have different teachers throughout my educational journey. Some were a lot more progressive than others. So the younger, cooler, more hip ones would have known that I was autistic. I wasn't quite like everybody else, and that I had other interests and passions and strengths that should have been nurtured, as opposed to being a naughty little boy that just wasn't like the rest of them.
Did people recognize those skills and talents that you had?
Yes, and the reading and writing one was always one that was highlighted to me by English teachers, by history teachers, and I became very good at linguistics as well. I can pick up languages incredibly easily, and it's just something that I've always been naturally good at. And yeah, it was picked up in that way, because there was one particular class. It's nearly like woodwork. It's here. It's called technology and design, and that does highlight some sensory issues, because the smell of a drill going through a sheet of acrylic is the most stomach churning smell ever. I mean, uh, give me rotting meat or eggs before uh, the smell of drill going through plastic, and it was really difficult. And instead of having that sensitivity toward me, at times I didn't, and it wasn't easy. I know now teachers and schools are much more understanding and much more productive and caring towards autistic students. And but by and large, the education system here, and from what I've heard from the US and other corners of the globe, is that a lot of schools do that. Although there are still some controversies
Mhm.
as well, which are very well known, which I don't know if we should go into. But I mean, it does exist. I mean, being autistic to me is a gift to be shared, and for a teacher, I think it is their privilege to have an autistic child in their classroom, because that child will open their eyes, their heart, and their world much more than the other 29 that's in the classroom. And I can guarantee that, because teachers have said that to me.
Okay, and that's beautifully stated. Now, let's talk about the teacher for a minute. Um, what would you like teachers to know is most important as they teach you and nurture you through their subject matter or through their grade? I mean, what is the most important kind of thing that a teacher can do to help a student who has the same kinds of needs and talents that you do?
Well, speak to the children about their interests. Speak to the child about what they're comfortable with and what they're not comfortable with. Because one thing that I find very, very unsettling, even now from a social care point of view, because that's the way my brain is programmed, that a lot of parent and teacher meetings would take place that would discuss their child's education plan, that would discuss their schooling as a whole. And a lot of that time, the child isn't actually involved in the conversation. I don't know whether it's a pre programmed belief that maybe autistic children just aren't as aware or they won't understand. And it's just the sad kind of system. And that's the global education system, that it's a points based, grades based, results based system. And I think sometimes autistic children can be viewed as a setback to that, and it's a step away from that kind of student centered approach that teachers should have. And even from whenever I was 5, I was able to communicate with my teacher and classroom assistant what I liked and what I didn't like, and it really did help in that relationship building process. And I think there should be, whether it's in Ireland, here, the UK, Europe, the United States, everywhere, I think that there should be, where appropriate and in most cases, if at all possible, that children should be present whenever their education plans or there's any discussions at all regarding their schooling and education, because there might be just one nugget of gold that the autistic child can confide in the teacher in, that might completely adapt their entire teaching style and improve the relationship with that one child in their classroom.